I have read the report. I've obviously skimmed through it. I'll be going through it in a little bit more detail before Monday. There are a lot of pages. I think if people have said they've sat there for hours and hours and hours picking through every single bit, I think they probably tell the odd porky there with that. But certainly what I've seen of it, I mean, I've not seen any major evidence or any conclusions that's changed my mind with it. But of course, we're talking about many things where Boris Johnson wasn't even present as well. And there's the two occasions in the Commons where he actually came, where he gave his account for that, and where he can actually also show where he's been given advice by those officials.
Yeah, but
now,
forgive me, Brendan. Forgive me, Brendan. We're talking about Boris Johnson's account of what he was told by senior officials. He was not told that. The officials told him the opposite. Could you address that for us?
Well, I mean, in terms of that, again, Boris Johnson, he gave his evidence to the committee. He was very, very firm in his statement that he's made in terms of rebuttals. And he was saying that these things were not the case. He was also said that when a mistake has been made, he has come and he has then corrected that later on. So occasionally we do make mistakes. He has corrected them. He has pointed out when
he never corrected that, Brendan. And unless you're suggesting that that Martin Reynolds, his private secretary, very close relationship with the Prime Minister, as you know, and he's director of comms at Number 10, unless you tell me that they're lying, and I'm sure you're not telling me that, well, then Boris Johnson was misleading us all.
He's given other examples of where he's been given the advice as well, and where it's been demonstrated that has been the case. But of course, in terms of what they're looking at, is we're looking at whether he actually deliberately misled Parliament or not on those two occasions.
Well, precisely.
It's a very, very difficult thing to prove, John.
Kate McCann.
Brendan, I mean, obviously, you're talking about whether it's difficult to prove. The committee dedicates pages, actually, in its report talking about how they believe they can conclude that Boris Johnson deliberately and intentionally misled Parliament. And they rest that on the fact that partly when they asked him in the committee whether or not he would have recommended at the time that people could hold work events during the COVID-19 regulations, at the time when he did, he couldn't say yes. Why do you think he couldn't say yes?
I think what we also have to remember is we didn't have one long lockdown throughout the whole of COVID, and those regulations, those rules, they changed over the course. The guidance changed, and in terms of the guidance that was actually given, there's room for interpretation, and there was always flexibility within those. So there were grey areas. I think we understand that. There's a lot of arguments about Partygate and the rights and wrongs of that, and whether people should have been fined or not. Now, I think if I'd have been fined for what Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak were fined for, I think I would have probably challenged it. But they held their hands up. They said, OK, we'll comply with that. We want to take some responsibility here for it. I suppose the downside of that is that we're having people picking on things where that necessarily wasn't the case. And of course, we get in the situation where we are, whereas I think the debate now has widened to more than it actually should be, rather than focusing on the specifics. And I think one thing that people were also very concerned about, of course, is that you shouldn't prejudge these things. And statements have been made in the past. The original chair of the inquiry had to recuse himself from that. The chair after that has also made comments. And quite understandably, if this were a court of law, that would be thrown out just for that alone.
Have you read the report?
I have read the report. I've obviously skimmed through it. I'll be going through it in a little bit more detail before Monday. There are a lot of pages. I think if people have said they've sat there for hours and hours and hours picking through every single bit, I think they probably tell the odd porky there with that. But certainly what I've seen of it, I mean, I've not seen any major evidence or any conclusions that's changed my mind with it.
But how can you know it's unfair, as you're saying it is, and it's already come to conclusions and it's not giving Boris Johnson the benefit of the doubt if you haven't read it?
Well, I have read it, Kate, but that's the point. I mean, the point is that we need to go through some of this. There's some very legalistic language that's being used, and we're going to be picking through in the comments. I mean, what you will also see there is the conclusions as to there's still leaks coming out now about how many days he was going to get, and then he commented on it last Friday. There's something else there as well. So it still seems to be an ongoing thing. So even though it's been published, there seems to be more coming out now that wasn't made available to us. So
okay. I mean,
you need that in the report as well.
Brendan, the Commons is going to overwhelmingly vote to back this report, and that'll be it for Boris Johnson, won't it, in a word?
Well, I don't know if it will. Obviously, it's a free vote, John. People can vote any way they want on this. It is a House matter. It is not a party political matter. It's not a government matter. And people will vote with their consciences, and they will vote after they've read the report. I've already said, really, I can't support the conclusions that are there. I believe what Boris Johnson has said, and I think it's excessive, actually. The 90-day suspension, if you look, Margaret Ferrier was around 30, and to take his pass off him, I mean, I think there's a huge overreach there.
Okay, thanks for sharing that view with us, Brendan Clarke Smith. Well, I'm John Pienaar, and if you found that interesting, we are here each day, Monday to Thursday, 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Drive, and from 7 till 8, Pienaar and Friends, where we discuss the big stories of the day each day on Times Radio.